Hi everyone. It's 11:01 and I think we're just going to get started now. I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar series that we have at the Invasive Species Center. My name is David Dukevich and I am the entomology technician at the Invasive Species Center, and I will be your moderator for today. I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the Robinson-Huron Treaty, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, home of Garden River First Nations and Batchewana First Nations and Métis. Next slide. The ISC is a not-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species that harm Canadians' economy, environment, and sociology. The website that we have at the Invasive Species Center is full of great species profiles as well as best management practices. You can view all of these information and more at www.invasivespeciescenter.ca. On the website, you can sign up on the homepage for our newsletter and bi-weekly media scan. As well as you can hear about our upcoming webinars. Before I get started today, I just wanted to go over a couple housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please use the question box that is in the GoToWebinar section, and you'd be able to type your questions in the box while we're doing our presentation. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the question box as well, and we will be able to sort through your technical difficulties. If neither of those are working, then please email us and we'll be able to get back to you and help you out. Today's webinar is titled The Present Status and Management of Emerald Ash Borer in Canada. And our speaker is Chris MacQuarrie from Natural Resource Canada. Chris earned his PhD from the University of Alberta, and he mainly focuses on population dynamics and management of native and forest pests. Right now, he's focusing on dynamics and biological control of emerald ash borer and optimizing trapping techniques for spruce budworm. And I'm going to switch over to Chris right now.
Thanks, David. Can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Thanks everybody for dialing in today. I'll admit this is the first time I'm giving one of these virtual seminars. It's a little weird not seeing all of you in front of me because I'm usually the kind of person when they present, I like to be able to see what the audience, how the audience is reacting. So I'm just going to assume that you are all understanding my slides and you are all laughing at my jokes. And if not, well, to heck with you. So I'm also, like David, I'm also in Sault Ste. Marie this morning. And thank you all for joining. And I hope you enjoy the talk. So today, let's see if we're going to switch slides. There we go. So this is just the outline of the talk. Today, I'm going to just talk a little bit the range of emerald ash borer in Canada, give you an update on the biological control program, then talk about some of the recent work on ecology and detection and control tactics that we've been doing in the Canadian Forest Service, and then a little bit work from colleagues on the ash seed collection project, and then a little bit on deregulation of emerald ash borer. Just bear with me for a moment as I adjust my screen so I can see my speaker notes. Cool. All right. David, just to note, I can't see I've minimized the question panel, so if there's a question that comes up, you can just, and you want me to answer it, just shout in. Okay, so talk a little bit about the area regulated for emerald ash borer. So on your screen right now is a map from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and this gives the current area regulated for emerald ash borer in Canada. So everything in yellow is regulated for EAB. And this corresponds roughly to the known invaded range for emerald ash borer in Canada as of this right now in 2020. The bit to sort of highlight to folks is this new regulated area in 2020 in New Brunswick. And this has been the biggest change probably in the expansion of the regulated area. The CFI regulated the counties in New Brunswick that kind of follow the Trans-Canada Highway. And this is following detections in northern New Brunswick that happened a couple of years ago, and then a couple follow-up detections in Gagetown, just outside of Fredericton, and then also in Moncton. So that corridor through the Maritimes. And then we also have the sort of infestations that we've known about for a while in Thunder Bay and Winnipeg, and then the contiguous area in southern Ontario and southern Quebec. So I'll talk a little bit about the biocontrol program, and this is certainly the thing that takes up most of my time these days. Before I do, I just want to acknowledge all the partner agencies, businesses and groups that have contributed to the biological control program over the years. We couldn't do this work without these folks, financial assistance and research assistance, and certainly with most of those folks sort of in that bottom strip of agencies and municipalities that have been kind enough to allow us to make research releases on their property over the years. And I also want to acknowledge the team, the biological control, emerald ash borer biological control research team in the CFS. Some of you may recognize some of these folks across the top. This is Barry Lyons, now retired. Dr. Lyons started the EAB biological control program in Canada. After Barry retired, Krista Ryle picked it up, and she ran it for a couple of years, and now I've taken over from her. But the person who actually does all of the majority of the work in the program is Jean Jones, the woman here in the yellow hat. Jean is the lead technician for the EAB biological control program, and has been the one sort of continuous person involved in the program and knows it inside and out. So we lean on Jean a lot for the work that we've done over the years. And then all these folks, these are our folks in insect production who grow a lot of the parasitoids in Canada, and then our collaborators at the Laurentian Forestry Center and the Atlantic Forestry Center who are responsible for releases in those parts of the country. So in Canada, there are 3 species of biological control agents that have been released. There's the egg parasitoid Ubius agrilli, and the 2 larval parasitoids, Spatheus gallinae and Tetrasticus planopenisi. Ubius is an egg parasitoid, and just to give you an idea of scale, this is an emerald ash borer egg here. Oh, excuse me, this is an emerald ash borer egg here on the screen. So you get an idea of how small that parasitoid actually is. It was first released in 2009 in the US and first released in 2015 in Canada. Spatheus is a larval parasitoid. It's from the Russian Far East, and the nice thing about Spatheus is it probably matches our climate better than maybe the other 2 parasitoids. It seems to do well with against 2-year life cycle budworm, which is sorry, not budworm, emerald ash borer, which is something we notice in some places in Canada. And then Tetrasticus planopenisi is the workhorse of the biological control program. It's been released in 2009. It's in the US, and since 2013 in Canada. It's by far the most common agent that's been released. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in 2019, and I'll explain to you why I don't have much to talk about in 2020, but you can all probably guess. These are the cumulative release sites for Ubius beginning in 2013. So you see the color of the dots matches the year that parasitoids were first released at a site. And what you should notice is that sort of the year of first release kind of follows this trajectory of where emerald ash borer has been spreading. So our first releases for Ubius were down in southeastern Ontario, southwestern Ontario, and have moved up towards, moved eastwards as the parasitoids, as the emerald ash borer has also moved east. And since the first releases of this parasitoid in 2015, we released about 54,000 Ubius across Canada. This is the same map, but now for Spatheus gallinae. The first releases of Spatheus were made in 2017, so it hasn't been released in Canada for that long. And so as a consequence, we have much lower numbers for this parasitoid, about 6,500. The program against Spatheus ramped up in 2018 and 2019, releasing it at some of the sites where we had done releases of other parasitoids before. And the plan for 2020 had been to increase the number of releases at these existing sites. And then finally, this is showing the releases for Tetrasticus, beginning in 2013, way down in southwestern Ontario, and then moving up east into New Brunswick and parts of Quebec, and even up here in northern Ontario. And I'll talk about that site a little bit more in a couple slides. And we've released about 172,000 individuals as of 2019, with a couple more this year. What we've been doing, sort of looking at the impact of those releases, is focused mostly on assessing establishment, impact, and dispersal of Tetrasticus, so the one that's been released the most. Ubius is a bit more difficult to survey for, and we haven't done a lot of surveying for that and assessing impact. And Spatheus hasn't been released for long enough in Canada to be able to do those kind of assessments yet. So what we focused on so far has been Tetrasticus. So we've had 3 research projects assessing the impact of the parasitoids, and in the first one over here is just sort of the standard establishment impact assessments that come from the U.S. Forest Service sort of guide for the program. And what we've done is we've sampled small trees from some of the release sites to examine establishment and quantify parasitism rates. And what this has shown is that the parasitoids that Tetrasticus has established at almost all of the places where we released it and completed the assessments. The part of the study where we're looking at impact was less conclusive, because we didn't recover a tremendous number of emerald ash borer to be able to assess what the parasitism rates were. So doing that, we went and looked at we started some other studies looking at impact and dispersible. And so the second effort was this caging study that we started in 2018. And so what we did is we caged up trees in some of the early release sites where we knew the parasitoids were established. And the intent here was to protect them from protect some of the trees from attack by the parasitoids, to be able to compare the difference in mortality between emerald ash borer that were protected and ones that weren't. And this collection wrapped up in 2019, and we're just at the stage where we're just looking at the data, and hopefully we'll see more about this later. And then our third experiment is looking at dispersal. So what we wanted to know is, now that these parasitoids have established in some of these sites, how have they been moving outwards, and are they moving into other ash stands? And so we began in the first collection for this was in 2019 at a trapping network set up in southwestern Ontario. And the processing of this collected a whole bunch of pan trap samples, you can see there on the screen. And the processing of this went through last winter, and then through the spring. In these pictures, you can see Megan Graves, the technician with our group, and Megan spent a good chunk of lockdown at her kitchen table with a microscope and these samples, processing them, looking for evidence of these EAV parasitoids. And so for some of the preliminary data from that experiment, we were able to confirm the establishment and the dispersal from 4 of the 7 sites where we made those 2019 collections. And this is just a blow up of that Tetrasticus release map. And you can see where we found parasitoids within these sites and then moving out of them, right? So evidence that they've established and started to disperse away from the release sites. So that's sort of positive news. That's kind of what we would be hoping to see in this kind of biological control program, that the parasitoids are establishing, that they're moving out, and that they are reproducing on emerald ash borer, and hopefully having some kind of impact on the population. So 2020 biological control. This is obviously, like everything else, significantly impacted by COVID-19. So our plan at the beginning of 2020 was to continue to make releases in Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, just at these sites that are all circled here. These were continuing releases of Spatheus, Tetrasticus, and Ubius. And what folks might not know is that we receive the lion's share of our parasitoids from the American Production Facility in Brighton, Michigan. So what we do to get these is we actually, Tim Ladd and Gene Jones, the technicians on the project, will actually drive to Brighton, pick them up from the production facility, and then bring them back across the border at Sarnia, and then ship them off to our collaborators. And so with the border being closed, we weren't able to actually access those parasitoids. What we do have are smaller colonies of Tetrasticus anubius at the Great Lakes Forestry Center in Sault Ste. Marie, produced by our insect production facility. Unfortunately, we don't make enough there to supply all of our Canadian sites. So the result is that we had to pull back on the releases that we did. So what the result is, we didn't make any releases in Ontario in 2020. We weren't able to make any releases of Spatheus gallinae because we get that parasitoid exclusively from the US. We don't have a colony in Canada. Unfortunately, what we were able to do was make some planned partial releases in Quebec City, in Quebec and New Brunswick at these sites with the blue circle around them. And so the Quebec releases were done in partnership with the sort of provincial and local counterparts that we were able to ship parasitoids and make releases in July and August. And then towards the end of the summer, our own internal travel restrictions were lifted enough that Corey Hughes with Atlantic Forestry Center was able to actually make day trips to do releases in northern New Brunswick at our sites in northern New Brunswick. So not as much releases as we were hoping to do this year, but we were able to salvage some of the program. So, but it wasn't all bad news. Late November, we got an email from Tim Ladd, and Tim is the lead rearing technician here at the Great Lakes Forestry Center who looks after our emerald ash borer colony and the parasitoid rearing. And what Tim does to rear emerald ash borers is he cuts ash mini bolts from a site just south of Echo Bay around just near Sault Ste. Marie here. And these are from a site where we know has emerald ash borer, but shouldn't have had anything else in it. And Tim sent an email in late November saying, I'm getting Tetrasticus coming out of these little mini bolts that I've collected at this site in south of Echo Bay. And that's just here on the map. Now, the closest Canadian release site is at Fort St. Joseph on the southern tip of St. Joseph Island, which is about, as the crow flies, about 35 kilometers. And the first time we made a release there was in 2017. Now, there have also been releases made by the American Biological Control Program in northern Michigan at these sites here. And if folks know Michigan, this is St. Ignace and Mackinac Island, so sort of this is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And this is about 70 kilometers away from our release site. And the first releases were made here in 2014. So what that tells us is at our site here south of Echo Bay, is that these are either dispersals from our release sites on Fort St. Joe, which means they've gone through about 35 kilometers in 3 years, or these are dispersers from these early releases at the American site, which have gone about 70 kilometers in 6 years, which if you do the math real quick, that's the same dispersal rate. What this tells us, though, is that's evidence of successful overwintering and dispersal sort of within Canada and possibly within these very northern sites. So that's sort of anecdotal, but it's sort of strong evidence that what we're hoping would happen with these parasitoid populations is happening, and certainly at these northern sites. This is Fort St. Joe is one of our farthest north sites for parasitoids releases in Canada. So it's promising and it's good news for us. So what's the plan for 2021? The plan is to continue releases within Canada, including sort of trying to maybe make up releases at these 2020 sites, and hopefully expand the network both in Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes, including Pembroke, as you can see here on the right. What we've done as a hedge against continued border closures is we've temporarily expanded the rearing capacity at GLFC to supply the release sites in Canada in the event that we can't make it across the border to pick up our parasitoids. And then what we're going to hopefully we can do is complete our spread and impact assessments at some of our early release sites, and that includes looking at spread within the Algoma region around so this northern site I was just talking about, looking at how far these parasitoids have actually spread in our area. And the nice thing about this is it's local work, so even if we do get sort of have travel restrictions continued, we should still be able to complete the study, which is nice. So I'm going to just change gears a little bit and stop talking about the biological control program. I'm happy to answer questions at the end if folks have them, or about all the stuff I'm going to talk about next. You know, just excuse me, I'm going to grab a drink of my coffee. I assume you're still there because it says there's 101 attendees, so it must be somebody's out there listening, and hopefully you all haven't tuned out and are checking your social media. So and talk a little bit about overentering survival, which, as somebody who lives in Northern Ontario, winter is something we think about a lot. So folks may remember the polar vortex of 2019, which may seem like a long time ago, but actually wasn't that long ago. This was a major cold event that happened in sort of the early part of 2019, and so folks remember that this event occurred, and we what we did is we published a paper later that year looking at what the predicted effect of that polar vortex was on EAV mortality, because this is a question we were getting a lot from folks going, you know, did this kill the emerald ash borers because it's been so cold? And we were really fortunate at the time that there were some really good models that existed, and one of them from Kim Cuddington's group. And we were able to pull that model and implement it in Biosim. This is Remy Saint-Amal's wizardry, and look at, you know, what's the predicted mortality. And what it showed is that there probably was pretty good mortality in Northern Ontario, Western Canada, you know, Winnipeg, those areas, but not so much in the US and certainly in Southern Ontario. So this is something we've been interested in a while, and this sort of got us thinking a bit more about sort of what's the cold tolerance, what's the overwintering mortality of those emerald ash borer. And so we got sort of reignited some, and we're sort of looking at what overwintering success looks like, and specifically what mortality looks like in Winnipeg and those far west, far north populations in Canada that regularly experiences these really cold events. And this is work we've been doing with Megan Duell and Brent Sinclair, and Megan's a postdoc in Brent's lab at Western in London, Ontario. And so Joe Crossway, working in Brent's lab in the sort of the mid-2000s, showed that London population of emerald ash borer, so that southwestern Ontario population of emerald ash borer, could withstand about -27 degrees, but experience significant mortality below -30. So that's been our basis of saying, you know, how cold can EAV handle, and what will it do in Canada? And the expectation is how we know. How frequently do you get those kind of cold events, and where do they occur, and how likely are they to limit the population growth? As folks were told, we had that find in Winnipeg a number of years ago, and we were fortunate enough to be able to get some logs from there in collaboration with a lot of help from the city of Winnipeg and the province of Manitoba. We had those sent to Sault Ste. Marie, and Megan and a team of students extracted them and sent them on down to Megan Duell at Western, and Megan repeated some of these cold tolerance studies like Jill had done back with that London population. And when she did, what Megan was able to show, and this is these bottom figures here in blue, is that the overwintering cold tolerance of those emerald ash borer from Winnipeg was a lot lower than the London population, which is what you're seeing in pink on the top. Some of those pre-pupa, which is what we're showing on the right, could withstand temperatures going down to -45, -46, very cold. And the larvae were able to do almost as well, sort of -40. So that's cold. That's really, really cold. Then the automatic question is, you know, is this because these insects in Winnipeg were acclimated to those temperatures? You know, it's a different climate in Winnipeg. Did those EAV recognize that and realize, you know, it's going to be picking cold here. I need to be ready for this, and we're able to, so they're able to withstand those temperatures when they occur. Or we're interesting from a sort of evolutionary perspective is this evidence of adaptation to a Canadian climate, right? Is emerald ash borer doing better because it's starting to evolve, you know, tolerance to our kind of Canadian conditions, especially in Western Canada. So what we thought we'd do is we would try and repeat some of these experiments by we wanted to repeat these overwintering assessments. And so what the plan was is that in fall 2019, we sent these logs to Timmins, Ontario, from southern Ontario to simulate a Winnipeg winter, because we weren't able to send them out to Winnipeg. And we sent some other logs to London to basically overwinter some stuff in some extreme and mild conditions. And basically we couldn't collect the logs in spring because of COVID. So 2020 strikes again, and that's this little GIF that you're seeing roll to the side of my slides. Basically, just kind of blew up this whole experiment. The plan is we're actually going to repeat this in 2021, and we were very fortunate to our colleagues with the province and the city of Winnipeg were actually able to get us some new emerald ash borer infested logs from Winnipeg, and those were sent down to London a couple weeks ago, and they're going to be sort of simulated Winnipeg winter in a different way, and then hopefully be able to actually Megan will get an answer as to whether or not this is adaptation or evolution of the cold tolerance in these emerald ash borer. So stay tuned for that. So the next little bit I'm going to talk about is some other work on developmental rates. So looking at how fast does emerald ash borer grow at different temperatures, and this is actually sort of dovetails nicely with the cold tolerance work, and I'll get to that a bit later. And this is work that is being led by Ken Dearborn, who's a PhD student at the University of Toronto, with Sandy Smith and myself and Dagan Inward, who's with Forest Research in the United Kingdom. And that may seem like a bit of an odd collaboration, but the context is emerald ash borer is a problem in Canada, a problem in North America, but it's a global problem as well. Emerald ash borer was introduced into near Moscow around the same time it was probably introduced into North America, and it's slowly been spreading westward into the EU, and with the potential to spread into the British Isles, and feeding there primarily on fraction 6 Celsius with the European ash. And the risk there, the risk that they're worried about is, if the EAB establishes in Europe, what's the potential impact on the European fractionists, which is also dealing with the double whammy of dealing with ash dieback, which is a pathogen disease of ash that's causing significant problems there. So the Forest Research is interested in some of the same questions that we are, predicting the risk of emerald ash borer in their climate and in their hosts. So we're interested in what's the developmental rate of emerald ash borer in different hosts, because we have information for sort of how it grows in the lab in tropical ash. We don't actually have a lot of good information about developmental rates in green ash versus white ash versus black ash, and then in Excelsior, right? So how does it do in European ash? So Ken has been tasked with solving this for us, and the method is relatively simple to explain, but it's challenging to do, and it's time consuming to do, and basically it's measured time to completion of each stage of emerald ash borer, just seeing the life cycle here on the left at different temperatures. How fast does it grow? So it's a lot of rearing insects, different temperatures, using in the growth chambers at GLFC, and then censusing these populations of insects at different times to see how much they have developed. And Ken's been doing that, and he's been working on green ash for a while, and he's just actually now started working on Excelsior, which is really exciting. And so I'll just showing some of Ken's data looking at egg hatch. So egg hatch at different temperatures. And already we're starting to see some stuff that's really interesting, and probably the most compelling thing is that you actually don't see egg hatch in emerald ash borer at 7 or 10 degrees Celsius. So you need about 15 degrees Celsius, it seems, to get eggs to hatch, which is pretty warm. And so that sort of tells us that these are the kind of conditions that EAB seems to need before it starts to develop under our climate. And so and like I said, Ken's been repeating these same experiments, running at different temperatures with larvae and then pupa and pre-pupa to see how long it takes to complete development. And we've been really interested to see what the differences between different hosts. And Ken was actually, in collaboration with the City Windsor folks, was actually able to get his hands on some European ash just recently, and has started rearing EAB on that. So we're interested to see how that turns out. That's again something should be ready in a year or two, we hope. So the long-term goal of taking all this, of collecting all these different kinds of data is so we can take stuff like the developmental rates that we're just talking about, and merge that with what are the impact of different mortality factors. So things like cold, but also things like the effect of parasitoids, and we've also looked at things population dynamics and host resistance and these kind of things, and try and build eventually a predictive model for emerald ash borer, right? And with that, we'd have we have an idea of how the EAB might be behaving on the landscape, and what this will let us do is better integrate management tactics and optimize where and how we can monitor for populations and how we can perhaps start to manage it as something that's going to be persistent on the landscape. And that's actually a nice dovetail to talking about some other research of colleagues. And so I'm going to start talking about my own stuff a bit and just talking about some other stuff that's being done in the Forest Service. Some really neat research that's being done across Canada. And the first one I want to talk about was sort of new detection tools for emerald ash borer traps. And this is a new paper out by George Chaipoku and his colleagues here at the Great Lakes Forestry Center, basically using genetic tools, something called LAMP, to rapidly identify and confirm emerald ash borer on traps and with other samples. And the neat thing about this is that like these reactions can be done in like 30 minutes at about 65 degrees Celsius, which is super fast, and for this kind of stuff, very low temperature. At least this is what they tell me. I'm a dirty booty ecologist, but this is even I understand this stuff, and it's really neat. So what? Just a figure I borrowed from George's paper. Basically, what you see here across in these little vials are different samples from emerald ash borer traps. Basically, if the vials turned green after the reaction, it means EAB was present on the trap, and if it turned orange, it means that it wasn't. The emerald ash borer was absent from the trap. And what I thought was really neat about this is that it actually could detect the presence of EAB on traps where the insects had fallen off, and that's what these two are. These two vials here with the stars on them. These are there was no emerald ash borer on this trap, but it still detected the DNA there. And that's really interesting because there's some work that Jeff Fidgen at Atlantic Forestry Center and was doing, just looking at how frequent does emerald ash borer actually fall off these green sticky traps that we use. And it's kind of neat that we could have a tool that a trap could actually detect an emerald ash borer, like catch an emerald ash borer, then the EB falls off, but you can still actually tell if it had been there. So I think that's really neat. And you can see there's a link there to the paper and all, and you'll get an email from the Basin Species Center after the talk, and it'll have a link to this paper if you want to know more. We talk a little bit about the Proxy Protect tool, which is work that was being done by Robert Lavallee, who's now out of the Range Forestry Center, who's now retired, and working with Claude Guertin. And the folks at the GDG, and John Sweeney at the Atlantic Forestry Center was working with GDG in 2019 on testing Proxy Protect in Halifax and Fredericton. And there's some experiments planned for 2020, but interrupted because of COVID. And GDG recently published this paper here on their tests with Robert, and I'd encourage you to check it out if you're interested in knowing more about that particular tactic. So almost to the end here, and I just have a couple more slides about some of the ash seed collection work, and then some other stuff out of our on EB and deregulation. So what we're interested in doing long term is being able to maintain ash on the landscape, and that's sort of the goal of the biological control program and developing survey tools and sampling tools and management tools. But at some point, it would be nice to be able to, it might be necessary to put ash back in the landscape or breed ash for resistance, and have ash that on the landscape that are resistant to emerald ash borer. And so to do that, you need genetic material, and the collection of that genetic material in Canada is led out of the National Tree Collection, the Tree Seed Center, excuse me, in Fredericton, and coordinating the collections of the ash genetic material. This is Donnie McPhee's project. And what's showing there on the slide is just a graph showing the sort of the size of the collection and the different species that are collected and in storage at the seed center. So concentrating on the sort of the three most important species in Canada, it's a green ash and white ash and black ash. And black ash is certainly very important. And so this is what the collection looked like, and the collection is by no means complete. The red area on this map indicates an area where more seed collections need to be done, and this is an area where Donnie's interested in getting collections from. What he's highlighted that there's very few surviving black ash greater than 4 centimeters in the Lake Erie lowlands and then St. Lawrence lowlands. So that's those places where EAB's been present the longest and having the longest impact. And the high priority areas for them and their collections are around the Sioux and Thunder Bay, Winnipeg, North Quebec City, and then places in New Brunswick and the Maritimes looking for black, green, and then white ash. So I think this is something, if you're interested in participating, Donnie would be the one to get a hold to, and hold of, and his email address is given there at the bottom of the slide. So just going to wrap up and talk a little bit about the Deregulation Environmental Dashboard. And these are some slides from Emily Hope and here at the Great Lakes Forestry Center. And basically, the Plant Protection Agency in the United States, which is APHIS, was looking at deregulating EAB and ash products at a national level. And the question that they're interested in is deregulation also appropriate for Canada? So the team at the GLFC was asked by some folks at the Pacific Forestry Center in Victoria and the CFIA to determine if EAB regulation in Canada is effective. So yeah, like I said, USDA APHIS has decided to remove the federal level EAB regulation for ash, and is that appropriate for Canada? So to address that question, the team built a stochastic EAB spread model and then performed an economic analysis of the costs and benefits of EAB regulation at various levels of effectiveness, which is really interesting. There's not community invasive pests. I think this has been done for in Canada, and what they found is that even with a minimal effectiveness in the regulatory efforts, slowing the spread regulation is likely efficient. However, it was also likely that EAB will spread much further across the country regardless of regulation. So, and I won't say much more than that because the authors have promised to do a talk for the Invasive Species Center in the next few months. And Emily will do a much better job of explaining this than I will. And but if you're in the meantime, if you're interested, the report is available in the CFS bookstore. That's the link, and it will we'll also send you a link to it in the email that will come out from the Invasive Species Center. So just in summary, thank you for listening. Thank you to David for organizing and the folks at the Invasive Species Center. Basically, I'll just leave that summary slide up, and I would be open to starting questions, David, if you'd like.
Okay, yeah. Let me just pull up the questions right here.
They're still there. I can see the numbers.
Yes. So our first question that we have is asking about the border crossings. And since it's closed to public recreational travel, but is going to get the tetracycus part of that travel ban.
Can you read that question again, David? I didn't quite understand.
Okay, so it says, to my understanding, the border is closed to public recreational travel. I thought that business-related travel was still occurring. Could the border crossing not be done under that category?
Okay, now I understand the question. The shorter answer is, as a federal employees, we're not permitted to cross the U.S. border, and we're the ones that go across and do the collections. And so, when we asked the question whether or not that would be permitted, the answer was no.
Okay, so that's a short and sweet answer, I guess.
Without going too much into it, the answer was no.
Yeah. Another question from Greg is, have any studies been done worldwide on possible side effects of introducing the biological control organisms?
So the question is on non-target effects of biological control organisms. And yes, there was a fair amount of work done on that question in the United States prior to the insects being released in the US. And so it went through, so there was non-target testing, both choice and no choice experiments looking at effects on other agrarialists that could potentially be at risk from these insects. That work was used to inform the approval process in the US to allow the parasitoids to be released in the US. That same research was used to inform the Canadian decision-making process, so whether or not it was allowed to be released in Canada. And the summary of that is that the larval parasitoids based on that assessment, pose very little risk to native Canadian fauna. There's perhaps some of the work on the egg parasitoids indicates that it might attack some of the other, I think it's bronze birch borer. But the sort of balancing that potential risk against the risk of losing ash, the risk of allowing EAB to spread unchecked, on the balance, it was decided that it was best to release the insect in North America.
Okay. Ron asks, it looks like Spatheus was not released in southwestern Ontario, KW, Windsor, London areas. Is there a reason why?
The short answer is, by the time we had permission to release Spatheus in Canada, those areas, the ash population in those areas had gone. So the ash population and the emerald ash borer population had gone past the stage where it was suitable for release of Spatheus. There's a set of criteria where we're looking for stands that have sort of rising emerald ash borer populations that can support an establishing population of the biological control agents. And as folks know, those areas in southwestern Ontario don't have a tremendous amount of ash left right now to be able to support a release. So that's why those releases weren't made there.
Okay. David asked, do you foresee municipalities or universities to be able to do releases beyond research purposes?
So in terms of municipalities, if there's a municipality that's interested in doing releases within their jurisdiction, that we would certainly encourage them to get in touch with us. We're always looking for places where we can do releases. And if it meets the criteria that we use to select release sites, it would sort of go on our list, as we like to say. If it's universities interested in doing research on parasitoids, we'd also be interested in talking to folks that have research questions around with the parasitoids and that want to use them as a study system for something. We're interested in what is the impact of these parasitoids. What are they doing out in the environment? Are they doing what we hope they're doing, and are they moving around? And certainly there's lots of questions you can ask about evolution and ecology, and that would be interesting to work with a university research partner. So we always just encourage folks to get in touch.
Okay. Anthony asks, do we know if the EAB population in Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Manitoba come from the same introduction? Do they share the same genetics?
We haven't looked at the genetic composition of the Canadian population recently. The last study that looked at that is a couple years old, and my recollection is that it shows that it was probably one introduction into North America, and then spread within North America from that. But the neat thing about these genetic tools is that they always seem to be getting better and better, and better able to answer these kind of questions. So I think it'll be something interesting to look at again.
Okay. Leslie would like a little bit of clarification on the bronze birch borer and how it's affected by the parasitoids.
If I remember correctly, basically the ubius will lay its eggs in bronze birch borer eggs.
Okay. Are you planning on more releases in southwestern Ontario? There are a lot of, or if there are any tree species left, ash is still really important to preserve and regrow.
So at this point, the releases are sort of more sort of Eastern Ontario and into Quebec and the Maritimes. Just sort of that's where we know about emerald ash borer populations that are at the right stage for us to be able to make what we hope are successful releases. If there are places in Southern Ontario that would meet, or Southwestern Ontario that would meet the criteria for a release site, I think we'd be interested in taking a look at them. This is where we lean a lot on Jean. She has a real good idea of what makes a good site and what doesn't. And when folks are interested, if folks think they have a place that would be good, we encourage them to get in touch with us.
Okay, I think I actually do have one question that sort of repeats on what James just asked, and sort of what you asked too, is ash in the future. How
Mhm.
likely is it to be left on the landscape?
That's a great question, and it's one of those things that is an area of active research. I mean, we had hoped actually to go to the field this summer and look at where is ash still present in the landscape in some of these long-term wandering plots, and this is work that Isabelle Abant at Great Lakes is responsible for. And that's a question like how much ash is there, what species are still there. I mean, when City Windsor said they still had European ash growing, that was kind of amazing. It's not something we would have thought. So it's an area of active research. I think I'm somewhat optimistic that it will maintain the landscape. I mean, they're just the sort of the residual ash that may have survived. And then there's some interesting work coming out of the US on sort of resistance into sort of natural resistance and the possibly that white ash might be surviving a little bit better than green ash. And then there's also work, a lot of interesting work being done on breeding resistant ash with the potential to release it back into the ecosystem. And so that's where the work that Donnie's doing, collecting these seed resources, is really critical. And hopefully that can sort of lead into breeding work on breeding resistant ash. And there's folks at the Laurentian Forestry Center, Natalie Isabelle, and some of the folks that are interested in potentially starting this kind of work in Canada. So I'm hopeful that there will be something there in the future.
Okay. Rita asks about how should forest managers adapt their tree marking and harvesting prescriptions for ash in areas where parasitoids have been released.
Oh, that's a very good question that I do not know the answer to, because I'm not a forester. All I could really speak to is the places where we have made releases, and where we do the releases, we sort of enter an agreement with the landowner that they will sort of promise not to cut the trees that are there for a period to give the parasitoids a chance to establish. Outside of those areas and the potential for establishment in and what they're doing in other places where we haven't released them, where they've been dispersed to, I don't have a good answer to that question. That's a really good question. I mean, that could be a research project on its own. I think that's really interesting.
Okay. Would you suggest municipalities continue to invest in treason for surviving ash trees?
It's not a question I'm terribly comfortable answering, just in that try not to recommend specific products or making specific decisions. I think when a municipality is trying to decide what they're going to do with their ash population, I think the first thing is they need to know if they have an inventory, and then if they have an inventory, what is the value of those ash trees to the community, and is the value of that ash, is value of that ash to the community worth the investment in a control tactic? And if the answer is yes, then selecting a tactic that works in your community is probably a good thing to do. But each community has its own values. Each community has its own set of conditions and competing interests, and it's hard to give sort of blanket advice to a generic community.
The next question is, have we observed emerald ash borer populations crashing in certain areas of Canada that are associated with lack of ash trees?
So the place to have observed that would be sort of southwestern Ontario. And what we don't have sort of good observations of good long-term observations of emerald ash borer populations in places like that. We don't have really good long-term observations of emerald ash borer populations in Canada really from anywhere. And part of the reason is because the way to do that, it's kind of hard to do that because the traps are the way you normally do that for an insect is with trapping. And the emerald ash borer traps aren't really good at giving you an estimate of the size of an amoeba population. They'll tell you whether it's there or not, but they don't track real good with population size. You can also do it by assessing sort of cutting down trees and assessing density. That's sort of really labor intensive, and as far as I know, nobody's done that sort of long term anywhere in Canada. We can sort of assume that's what's happening in these places where ash is gone. Ash is sort of reduced in abundance and died. The emerald ash borer population is probably small. The sort of outstanding research question and something to be that we're interested in going and doing at some point is looking at what's the size of that endemic emerald ash borer population, the one that's sort of resident. What is it? How big is it? And what is it doing? And where is it?
Okay. I think we have enough time to answer these last three, and then any further questions we'll have to email Chris about. So one of the last questions is, will monitoring for young ash regrowth be done? And will the parasitoid release be released when ash becomes mature enough to be targeted by emerald ash borer?
So what was the first part of that question again, David? I'm sorry.
The monitoring of young ash regrowth, is that going to be done in relations to the parasitoid releases?
So I don't know of anybody monitoring for ash regeneration. That could be yeah, I don't know of anybody doing that. In terms of monitoring the status of the parasitoid populations, that's something some of the work we've started in southwestern Ontario, and the work that I presented earlier in the slide, earlier in the talk. Long term, yeah, that would be really interesting to see what is going on in these sort of longer term established populations in places where we didn't release the parasitoids. And that's certainly a research project for the future.
Okay. What about another question is EAB showing any resistance in native ash tree populations?
So the question is are native ash populations showing resistance to emerald ash borer?
Yeah, whether it's with black ash, white ash, blue ash, green ash, is there any resistance being shown?
Yeah, so there's some pretty decent evidence from early on that the blue ash is pretty resistant to EAB. There's some more recent work coming out of the US that says perhaps white ash does a little better than green ash in terms of mortality. It survives better. Just looking at terms of sort of, and I don't know if work in green or black ash. I mean, they're certainly susceptible. Looking for those chance resistant species, resistant individuals, is a much more difficult job. We don't have sort of long-term monitoring plots for ash in Canada to look and see what's the fate of individuals as they go through. So some work that we've been wanting to do for a while is to go back into these places where the insect has been for a long time and survey stands, sort of surviving stands that used to be ash or still have some ash in them apparently, look at those resistant individuals, and then collect material from them and look at indicators of genetic, you know, genetic resistance to emerald ash borer. And this is again, this is Natalie Isabel and the folks at the Ranch and Forestry Center that are leading that kind of work.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, I think we're just going to hold it there for now for the questions. I'd just like to thank you once again for presenting today. And for more awesome webinars, please check out our website at www.invasivespeciescenter.ca. Our next webinar is looking at in January, which is looking at covering what's being done to cover Asian carp in Illinois. So that will be an excellent webinar as well. And we hope you enjoyed the presentation. The recording for this presentation will actually be on our website. We'll post that later today or within the week anyways. And we'd like to thank you, Chris, once again for your discussions. And any other further questions that people have, we'll be able to pass along to Chris, and hopefully we can answer them as we go.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much.